Yeah, so for those that don't know, I'll introduce myself. I'm Molly Jane, the president of the acjr this term and one of the original co-founders. And we've gathered you all here today to have, I think, a really important conversation in embargoes. This conversation has come up ever since we started the acjr chat a few years ago, and it's obviously come up probably in everyone here's lives before the acjr existed. It's not like we came up with the problem of embargoes. Anyway, so we have this webinar today. We'll have our moderator and our panelists talk a little bit about embargoes, and then towards the end, we'd love to get questions from the audience. This meeting will also be recorded, and I'm going to be taking notes to come up with maybe a nice one-pager of best practices drawn from this meeting that we'll be sending out, as long as you guys give us some good insights. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for joining. I'll mute myself and turn off my camera and let you guys go forth and prosper.
Thanks, Molly. Thanks, acjr. Great club. Just, first opening note, if you are watching this Zoom and you are not in the club, you should get into the Telegram room. acjr stands for Association of Crypto Journalists and Researchers. A lot of good chatter always in there. It is not just journalists. There's a lot of comms people or flacks in there as well. Always some juicy debates happening, especially on big crypto news days. So just real quick by way of intro, Kevin Dinino has his own PR firm. Is it KCD PR?
That's right, Dan.
Did I get that right? KCD PR?
You did, yep.
Cami, of course, is the founder of the Defiant. Hey, Cami.
Hey.
And then Trista is EIC at DL News, part of DeFi Llama. Hi, Trista.
Hi.
Great. So I don't want to waste too much time, and I'm Dan Roberts. Good to see a lot of names I know on this screen. So thanks for listening. I don't want to waste too much time on big sweeping intros. I think probably if you're watching, you have dealt with receiving or sending embargoed news. And as Molly said, it's a topic that has come up over the years, over and over in the chat. I do want to give a little bit of specific credit where due, because the most recent time that it came up again and kind of re-inflamed everyone was this very good piece at DL News by their ombudsman, Robert Holloway. The headline is, "An embargo is an agreement, not a crypto PR hype tactic." And so the sharing of that latest piece that was in April prompted everyone to get their dander up all over again about embargoes. And I'll just quickly add, my favorite part of that piece was toward the end. Robert apparently reached out to a lot of comms people for comment, and very few responded, although one of them responded by sending him embargoed news. I think that says a lot. But I also want to make clear here, there's sort of two sides of the aisle here. There's the reporters, and then there's the comms and PR people who are just trying to do their job. And so there's really no good or bad guy here. But the question is there a better way? Is there a better way for people representing crypto projects and companies to get news directly to reporters than the embargoed release? And I thought a fun way to start us off, rather than debating yet or brainstorming if there is a better way, is for everyone to share maybe a embargo horror story they have. And you can name names or not. And I'll start us off by keeping it generic. In general, my complaints about embargoes are, first of all, something that it seems to me happens not infrequently, is that they've sent the embargo to everyone. We all know how this works. They say, here's the news that Base is announcing. And you can go live with this news at 9 a.m. Eastern on Tuesday. Okay, great. And suddenly at 8:30, some other site goes live with it. One of the sites that's been sent the embargo. And usually what happens is you hear from the comms person, and it's not their fault, and they're upset too. And they say, oh my God, so sorry. This site just ran with the news. Obviously now you can go ahead and publish. Well, we've in many cases already scheduled the story to go up at 9. Now the question is, we have to scramble and can we tell an editor, drop what you're doing and hit publish on this? Now we're behind. Maybe in SEO, the site that went first is going to be listed first. And of course, someone always says, it was an accident or they'll be punished. Well, they're not going to be punished. In the future, the comms person or their company is not going to not include the site that went early. This will all be forgotten. So long way of saying, what's really the incentive to play ball and agree on the publishing time? This, of course, is just one gripe I have. There are a number of issues that come up. But let me kick it over to whoever wants to go first, Kevin, Cami, or Trista, on your own kind of memory of embargo-related hiccups that have happened.
I think for me, like that's definitely the biggest issue we've had, and not just once. Being told this is story scheduled to go out at X time, and then we see somebody else publishing first, and then there's always the suspicion that that was actually agreed to beforehand. Like I'm not sure if the other publication actually broke the embargo, or if the PR firm allowed them or gave that as an exclusive, or like, they were able to publish first, which I I don't know, like I have to think that's many times that's the case. Because like we're all, professionals working, like we know how embargoes work. I find it very hard to believe that another professional journalist like myself would just like go ahead and break an embargo. So I don't know. I think there's just the lack of transparency, I think, is the issue here. Another issue we've had with embargoes is the whatever, the project company doing the announcement, changing things very last minute, and us having the story ready and then having to scramble to get the details out on time. And because there's this deadline, it's not an ideal situation to be reporting, fact checking, and getting the best story out there. So just having to organize between so many different parties involved in an embargo, the PR firm, the project, the journalists, all of that. And then having to change things around at the last minute is also not a great practice, obviously.
Just doing my homework for this talk, I searched the word embargo in my inbox, and I probably had 40 or 50 embargoes that were just sent to me willy-nilly by people I've never heard of, firms I've never heard of, about companies I've never heard of. So it's become a tactic that seems to just, being spammed with press releases is one thing, but then there are press releases with a condition as well. I find that somewhat offensive.
I can chime in, I think, from the comm standpoint. So, and appreciate kind of hearing from the media side too. So, I guess, Camila, to your point on finding it hard to believe, I guess I'm here to tell you that it does happen. Journalists break embargoes all the time. And my biggest horror stories, and there's several, and with I'll use publications, but we're talking TechCrunch, VentureBeat, going out an hour before a specific time. That exact scenario, I think, Dan, that you detailed has happened in the past several times. But I think kind of to the broader point on the comm side, and Trista, you touched on it. It's something that's probably, I think it's it's definitely a relationship-based agreement, emphasizing relationship. I've been doing comms for almost 25 years. The way I was taught embargo and communications very much was you offer it to folks that you know well, that can operate within this agreement, and there has to be a reason as well for getting into an embargo agreement. That might be, hey, whether it's a CEO or a partner, there's going to be multiple layers to a conversation. I want to give you enough time. That's part of it. There's no reason to do an embargo if you don't know a reporter. There's no reason to do an embargo just firing off. And I think there's a amateur hour component to, roughly speaking, comms that is definitely crept up, and that you probably have a large amount of people who have not been trained properly under the guise of media relations that are now kind of just shooting out, for lack of a better word, spam. And unfortunately, those of us that are trained and know what we're doing kind of get lumped into this too. So I guess just food for thought on that. I guess my last point with embargoes would be, if they went away tomorrow, I would be the first raising my hand and saying, amen, love it.
So,
great. I think yeah, to that point.
well, it's funny. I mean, we've floated in the chat, some of us over the years, the idea that, if only we could all get off the embargo train by agreeing as a coalition of crypto news sites, we're not going to do it this way. But in fairness to you and you know your peers in the industry, Kevin, if you're trying to send out news that a client is about to announce, I mean, short of saying just put it on your company blog and then any news sites that want to cover it can cover it, which of course has its own problems because then you're just following and aping the corporate blog. You know, I haven't heard necessarily a better way. Now, of course, the other caveat I'd give, having been editor-in-chief of Decrypt for a while and been at a lot of different big news organizations, is like we all also can agree that ideally, if you are a hungry, driven, you know, reporter with sourcing, you are breaking news regularly anyway without having to be spoon-fed embargoes. And I should add that in the bigger picture, that's my larger headache with embargoes, beyond just the little granular things we're talking about in terms of process and logistics. I fear that when we write up stories from embargoes, what we're doing is every crypto news site has the same exact story. We're all writing the same stories every day, you know? And so obviously it's easier said than done to say we're not going to do it, because if it's base, well, this is a very big name and we're all going to cover it. Or if it's Grayscale doing some new, whatever it is, fund, ETF, we know we're all going to write that story. But I just hate the idea that if you went to CoinDesk, Decrypt, Blockworks, DL News, Cointelegraph, etc., at 9:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, every site has a form of the same story because we all got the same embargo. So I guess this is a good time to ask Kevin and you guys if there is a better way, or if there are other ways that you've tipped multiple people at once, Kevin, about upcoming news.
I'm happy to address that and then welcome the rest of the panel to kind of weigh in. I think tightening the I guess targets, if you will, for news. And I think you laid things out where if there's an obvious piece of significant news, M&A, massive funding round, emphasizing probably massive, you know, some sort of big piece of change where you know there's going to be multiple parties involved that would want to be interviewed. Tipping off probably like your top 3 or 4 targets and really determining, you know, from a comm standpoint, like, hey, who do we really want to cover this news? And in terms of offering that, so probably having a tighter list. And then, you know, what we tend to do is really try to focus on an exclusive. So when you have quote unquote news, there's lots of news organizations that cover news, but there's in many cases probably a better day 2 or day 3 story about, you know, how that news impacts, whether it's the ecosystem or use cases, et cetera, that might even be more interesting, that might fit a journalist's beat better anyway. And so again, I don't know, Dan, if there's a system or a process, but it's probably less throwing stuff against the wall, hoping that sticks, and more really kind of honing in on like a handful of key people. And then to your point, if the news is big enough to be covered by anyone else anyway, it's just a matter of kind of sending it to them without this whole embargo game. That's my 2 cents.
We love day 2 stories. We don't have a team that's big enough to handle breaking news all the time anyway, and we're not in enough time zones for us to be on top of everything. So we miss things as a feature and not a bug, and try to get the day 2 most of the time. But you know, if it's a big story and it has a massive name in it, you just can't avoid it, especially for traffic-driven publications as opposed to paywalled. Most of my career is spent behind paywalls, and I don't remember, I can probably count on one hand or 2 hands the number of embargoes I've had to deal with behind a paywall. I think Cami and I used to work at Bloomberg together. Hi, Cami.
Hey.
And yeah, I just don't remember. I was racking my brain today trying to think of the last time I've handled an embargo, and most of the time, I mean, I was on the pharmaceuticals team, and a lot of time it was like FDA results or things like that, Nobel Prize winners, so that we could understand what the Nobel Prize winner in physics actually won for, that type of thing. We just never dealt with embargoes. It must be it's more of a traffic model, isn't it?
Yeah, I was also thinking about that, thinking about how at Bloomberg that wasn't really a thing to get so many embargoes. I guess, except when I was covering crypto at Bloomberg, then I was flooded with embargoes. But it really is a more of a crypto specific phenomenon for some reason. Or maybe, yeah, like the beats we're at, like I was at in the markets beat, mostly emerging markets. It's harder to find a reason to send embargoes on that. But I think maybe a better way to use embargoes would be to use them for like the thing that they were originally meant to do, which is like give reporters enough time to prepare a story that is very technical, or takes time to digest. Maybe there's a report that you need to read through, something that actually warrants preparation, and not just, oh, like here's this funding round that you can just literally crank out a story in 20 minutes. So I think it's really been abused, and I get why. Like it's an easy way to just blast out your news, but I think it lowers the quality of reporting, because as a news organization, if you get an embargo, everyone else is getting it. So why put effort in something that's going to report it everywhere? And I'm sure that most news teams are going through the same thought process, especially, like smaller teams like the Defiant and Deal News. We're going to put in the effort where we can really make a difference and value add. So, but if everyone's thinking, oh, we'll just, push out this embargo news quickly because everyone else will have it, then, the reporting on that news piece just becomes worse. So I think like a better way to get the news out, I think, is using embargoes for what they're meant to be used for. And I think this targeted approach would be a much better way to do it. Like Kevin said, just like reach out to the journalists you think will do a good job, work with them to get an actual good story out, not just like, okay, rewriting a press release, but like, putting in touch with the different, like interviews that need to be done and data, and so that we can all elevate the level of reporting in crypto and not just like rewriting a bunch of press releases.
I also find that it seems symptomatic to crypto specifically. And I'm not sure how that started, but in my time, I spent a long time at Fortune and a long time at Yahoo Finance. I don't remember dealing with embargoes either. I don't know why it would be specific to covering crypto news. But, maybe it's because we tend to be kind of, and I've always found it a little bit of a demeaning term, but we tend to be thought of as trade press. All the sites that cover crypto news are thought of as trade publications. And so there may be an instinct among people who are trying to blast out news, like, well, I'll just send it to all of them at once and we'll see who covers. I think it would be fertile ground, Kevin, to dive into more what Trista and Cami just brought up of targeting it better. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the PR pro here, but the client sometimes has to be convinced to go for an exclusive. In other words, if you say, look, you're a ZK project and you're about to announce a big fundraise, and because it's ZK and because it's kind of, in the weeds, wonky tech, we think we should target, say, CoinDesk. And you, Kevin, say to the client, I know just the guy at CoinDesk who covers ZK and staking, and I'm going to go and we'll give him an exclusive. They might say, well, but we think we could get more than just CoinDesk. We want you to get more than just one story. I mean, is that something you face? And so it's easier said than done to say, I'll just go to a smaller circle of people.
Those conversations definitely happen. There's obviously a lot of nuance and variety to them, but I think the comms pros perspective is, where can we, for lack of a better word, get the best bang for our buck in terms of kind of coverage and opportunity. So in many cases, you're potentially trying to convince the client that going the exclusive route, with a good relationship and giving them enough time to have a more robust story might be a better result than having 4 or 5 outlets, kind of just do a cursory kind of news commentary as well. And I think most clients, frankly, would take that counsel. Others that don't, you go through that process and then maybe you see what ends up happening and that you have pretty vanilla coverage. It's, lacking quotes or perspective, et cetera. And then you can kind of go back to the well. And I think there is without going too deep down like the exclusive embargo rabbit hole, I think there is a ton of value in providing scoops and exclusives on news to trusted folks when there is the opportunity as well. I think that's a key part of it. But to the point of being unique to crypto, I don't want to make a too general statement, but we started out, our firm started out very much working in financial services and financial, and then fintech and crypto really kind of took off, call it the middle of the 2010 to 2020 range as well. And so it was like a natural progression into working into crypto and technology as well. So a lot of our process and the way that we conducted media relations really didn't change. I think what happens with crypto is there are just a lot of, for lack of a better word, people, that are attempting to do media relations / PR in crypto that have zero training, that have zero experience, that in many cases might undercut the job from a skill set standpoint, say, oh, this is easy, I can do it. They're sending blasts, they're using words like embargo, or they might not know. There's kind of a Marcom SEO play at work here of let's just push stuff out. And so unfortunately, I think that probably is what's happened. And you have, frankly, an industry that's growing, and there's a little bit of a wild, wild west mentality still to it, which we love about it to an extent. But on the flip side, I think that has to be what's happening if that's what you're seeing specific to crypto. And I would agree, having worked with banks, credit unions, fintechs, there's a little bit of it, but not to the extent in crypto.
Kevin, is that experience limited to PRs, or do you find that in the journalism as well?
It's a great question. I think see it a little bit in journalism. I mean, the reality too is a lot of reporters that sometimes that we're interacting with tend to be very green, whether they're recently out of school, and are have a lack of understanding. And in that situation, it's okay. Like we can educate, provide background info as well. Like that's not as big of a deal. But on the topic of embargoes and even being broken, like I gave a couple examples. Like there have been repeat offenders on that. And I get it. Like on your end, there's a rush to be first in many cases and a lot of pressure on that side. And that's where my take is like, hey, if embargoes completely went away, great. We're doing it really as a service to a lot of journalists who have come to us over and said, hey, I need more time. I'd love to cover this. Can you give me 2 weeks? There are very specific journalists that will say, prominent ones that will say, I need 2 weeks notice on this. And from our standpoint, imagine explaining that to a CEO, who has a large announcement. Like that's hard for them to gather as well. And so it's a little bit of a dance of, hey, journalist that needs 2 week notice, we definitely have something big coming up. Here are some of the details I can give you, but like we're truly building this stuff kind of along that route too. So, but it is a good question, Trista. I would say becoming more and more of an issue on the reporting side as the reporting industry, frankly, shrinks as well.
Cami and Trista, since we're circling the idea that in our experience, this is more of a problem in crypto media specifically, and not to get too inside baseball, so to speak, but we are here in a group of people who are in crypto. To what extent do we think some of these problems are exacerbated by just how focused crypto news sites are on each other? That is, they're focused on competing with the other crypto news sites. And what made me think of this was earlier when Kevin said, usually, if possible, I'll try and do an exclusive with one person I have a good relationship with, one reporter. And my immediate thought was like, well, but then, and I think, Kevin, you said that if it's big enough news and everyone's going to cover it anyway, then they're going to cover it anyway. But the immediate thought I had was like, well, if you're the block and the story runs on CoinDesk first and you haven't been tipped to it, now you're worried that if you cover it, you have to credit CoinDesk as having been first. And everyone, of course, is, God forbid, I have to link out to a direct competitor.
I don't think that's exclusive to crypto though. Like, I mean, there was such a huge rivalry between Bloomberg and Reuters, and it's like you couldn't even say Reuters, It's like what was, I don't know, there was like a saying that they said, like the one who shall not be named, whatever, when they beat us to some piece of news. So yeah, I think like journalists are competitive with each other, like probably, I mean, and there's a good reason for it. It's like most of us are depend on traffic. We're competing for first place in Google. Unfortunately, you know, it's like that algorithm is what we live and die by. So it's how the industry is designed and how the model works that makes us, you know, need to compete to some degree against each other. It's a really bad business model, but I think that's a topic for another panel, like how we can actually fix this. But for now, I think
Please.
this is what we're stuck with, you know?
Yes, please. Another panel on how we
Yeah.
can. Yep.
Yeah,
Just-
I'd love that panel. But yeah, I think it's a problem of the media industry as a whole. Like I don't think publications competing with each other is specific to crypto.
I think one of the things that is specific to crypto though is in mainstream media, if it bleeds, it leads. If something's bad news, more people will click on it. In crypto, that is considered FUD. More readers love good news. And a lot of PR firms probably know this or probably have intuited this by, oh, there's a new protocol, there's a new project, there's a new airdrop, and readers absolutely love it because they want that alpha, or they just find it very interesting and they want to support the industry. So there is a reader incentive, a traffic incentive kind of built into crypto that I don't think is in other media. I don't know if that's true. I think it's just an observation I've had.
I think it's more than good news. I think it's price news. So it's like airdrops, like yield farm points, price dropping, price increasing. Most people in crypto, I have become 100% convinced since, you know, covering this thing for years, are in it for the money. Like they're here to make money. And I shockingly, but yeah, like I was a bit disappointed. Like I did over 60 one-on-one interviews with Defiant subscribers a while back, and I was like, why are you subscribing? And I was hoping they'd say, you know, wanting to learn about this decentralized future of finance or whatever, taking control of my assets. And no, like everyone was just like looking for alpha. So
Right.
yeah, I think like price news, whether good or bad, is what's going to drive traffic.
But I guess if you're scoop driven and you're super competitive with your rivals and you break an amazing story that is bad, quote unquote bad, there's somebody who's you know, doing something wrong, etc., and that might bring down the prices, then no one will click on it because they don't want that alpha. That's
No, but
not
like
alpha.
hack news,
Oh
drive
yeah.
tons of traffic, and that's, you know, that's because it'll crash the token. So yeah, I think it is. I think it's like anything that will move the price.
I'm seeing a couple comments come in. There's also some that came in before we started, and I'll get to one of those. But this from Keelan, I hope I say that right, from my time abroad in Ireland. I think Kaylin or Keelan. What if, and this, Kevin, to your point of trying a smaller targeted circle, what if an embargo was limited to a handful of relevant journos and communicated transparently with the recipients? This is the part of this that would be new, I think, i.e. I've also shared this embargo with DL News and the Defiant, etc. And the revolutionary part of this might even be, imagine sending it to all of them at once. In other words, they can see the other email addresses on there. I wonder how that would go over. And again, I think again of the competitive juices between the crypto sites. But how do we think that might work versus we receive the embargo in a vacuum one-on-one, and we have to wonder about, did you send this to 4 sites or 30 sites?
I mean, operating from that, I would love if my team can do that, but I also would be extremely curious how media would interpret that. And I guess even just throwing it out, Camila and Trista and Dan, to you both, imagine if we came to you with like some pretty significant news and said, hey, we've offered the exclusive to Bloomberg. They're going to run it at 8:30. However, you 3 are in the mix to run it anytime after that. and interview any of our folks. Like, yeah, you're gonna be like, you know, how would that be
I always hated,
interpreted?
always hated
As,
that.
yeah, it's transparent. And, you know, and in many cases, if Bloomberg's going to cover it, or if it's deemed sort of a, you know, a national large enough story on our side, we're going to go with the largest distribution related to that as well. So I guess I would love it if the transparent part plays, but my gut tells me, having done this a while, that there's a competitive nature of journalism too, in terms of being first, that sometimes might trump that. But curious what Trista and Camila think on that front, you know, as well.
I'm not, we already know that we can't compete with Bloomberg on breaking news.
Okay.
So you know, we're cashing in our chips on that front, but I think we can definitely compete on, you know, analysis and kind of that deep dive, that day two stuff.
So if it was more of a day two story, if you will, and there were, you know, 2 or 3 competitive peers in the mix, and it was an email like that, how would that go over potentially as well? You know, because I personally like that approach. It is very transparent. It would probably unclog your email boxes significantly as well. But just kind of curious how that would play out based on the comment.
Well, to be honest, like I have a very unusual name. So in my inbox, and a lot of times I'm not even writing. So in my inbox, I get, "Hey, Trisha," or "Dear," whatever. We were all joking about this with the team before. You know, people spell our names wrong, don't know who we are, what we do, nor do they care. It's just a blast spam into the inbox with, "Oh, by the way, this has terms that you get. We dictate those terms to you, even though we can't spell your name right." That's, I think, the more annoying part than, "Oh, by the way, Trista, I'm giving this to Bloomberg. What do you think about this?" There's a conversation. I mean, right there, that's what you talked about at the very beginning of this call, which was the relationship. That's more important.
Yeah, I don't know
Absolutely.
if I'd mind very much to be told exactly who is getting the embargo. Like, I'm already assuming, you know, others are. So just like knowing exactly whom wouldn't make a huge difference. I think knowing that somebody and who that publication is getting an exclusive and will run with, like, we'll have the story first no matter what. I think it would is also helpful. Like, I would rather know than be surprised. That way I know that, okay, instead of like trying to break this or like be on time with the embargo, maybe I can just focus my efforts and resources on a day two story. You know, I think transparency is always better than not knowing.
I always wondered how the tactic of saying X bigger publication has the exclusive at this time really works in practice, because, well, now that we know, you know, okay, then we'll go 1 minute later. Like, you know, it's the comms person can't really dictate for the first 30 minutes. You know, I've seen occasionally in the past, they say, you know, the Times has the exclusive and they have an exclusivity window, or they get a 30-minute lead time. And it's like, well, no, you've just told me what the story is, and now I have the information. So why would we wait 30 minutes while they enjoy having the only story for SEO, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe in those cases, if you're going to give an exclusive to anyone, you just lean into the fact that you've made your choice and you're giving that place an exclusive. And if the news is juicy enough, other places will aggregate and credit the first.
Bingo. And I mean, I think that is more or less a consistent approach that our team takes. You know, along those lines. I mean, I think you obviously prioritize, you know, kind of the best outlet, the best fit for a story, for a client. And then, you know, then there can be various story idea pitches, whether it's that day two story, or, hey, here's a unique, you know, here's how the founder actually came to create this company. And there might be like a really unique angle that, you know, doesn't really correlate maybe to the news at that particular time, but it could correlate to a broader industry trend or something going on, you know, where that exclusive just simply doesn't have the bandwidth to cover that particular topic at the time.
of course, from your perspective, the whole relationship building, I would think, is you'd be sort of trying to get stories written even when you don't have current news to pitch. That is, ideally, you'd land those stories at any time, evergreen, about the client, rather than trying to get it out of, I feel like too often the representative is trying to get a bunch of stories written all at once, all at the same time, so they can say, look how many places we landed this.
Great PR people can achieve coverage for their clients in the absence of news. I think that's something that I've said a lot. I think it's the creative story ideation and pitching. Obviously you want to target reporters and journalists at publications that cater to that sort of coverage as a whole. But to be able to, link a trend, pull an industry stat or report and bring in, let's say, a third party, and where you can kind of package that story and pitch a reporter a really unique angle, but bring multiple resources to the table. Like that, to me, that's why I got into comms. And like that's good comms and good media relations in terms of, providing a story that, your readers, the readership might not know anything about, because of that.
Trista, Molly asked one here that might be for you, especially because you keep talking about the day two story. But if you know that you're more of a day two story place, do you find it helpful to receive embargoed news at all?
I would ask my reporters that. I think so, definitely. I mean, obviously you want to feel like you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on. And always that some people do offer interviews with the executives or project runners or whatever. So I think it's useful.
I want us all, especially the journos, to be like really honest here. We're among friends in terms of the idea that, even if someone else was first, you can write a sort of interesting story the next day or in the next 2 days. The sort of cynical retort to that would be like, yeah, but everyone sees that you're following, right? Like there's certain people, and I don't happen to be one of them, but there are people who are kind of like, if you can't be first, then every story that comes after the first one. Now, of course, you might try and write a better story. Ideally, you're both first and best, right? You write the most interesting story that has the most interesting analysis and educates, and you had it first. But when you can't be first, there are those who are such kind of breaking news hounds that they think every story that comes after is clearly just scrambling. Tammy?
Well, in the end, I think readers make the decision on what's best. And what I've seen from our traffic is that many times it's those day two stories, it's like features and more like educational type content, what gets most read than just like the breaking news stuff. It usually is. I think, most of the time, those are the stories that get read. So I think reporters should like swallow their pride a little bit, and just go for the bigger story, the feature, the analysis, because they are better stories, and most importantly, it's actually what people are more interested in. Like, people want to understand, so what? Like, why does it matter? Or more specifically, how does this impact my bags? Is the question that they're trying to answer. So I think if you can answer that question better than whoever broke the story first, you're probably going to get more clicks. So it's worth doing.
I totally agree, Cami.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd hope that there's room in the crypto journalism space for those types of stories, and that readers would reward them with their traffic and everything. But it remains to be seen.
That's great from Molly. I want to get to that in a second, Molly's latest comment. But there's one that we received before we started, and I think it's a good time to go to this. We kicked off the panel with your embargo horror stories. Someone wrote in and asked, can the panelists share any memory of a time when an embargo resulted in something really great? Which I know is kind of hard to be put on the spot anyway, because it's
like a great story. Hmm. Oh, that's so tough.
I
I
don't
think
know.
probably there has to be, but
Let me be specific. I have found the actual name one time the embargo actually resulted in something useful to the reader.
well, I think I mean, that phrasing I don't think is 100% fair. I think like many embargoes are useful. I mean, many times they are big news, and we choose to cover them because they're important things to cover. So yeah, I think if publications are covering embargoes, it's probably because they are useful to their readers. I mean, otherwise we just wouldn't cover them.
Kevin, can you think of big successes you've had? This embargo went great.
I mean, there's lots of big successes, but they're all tied to the process of the embargo kind of going smoothly, and that, you know, the media that requested and or needed the time to write said story had ample opportunity to talk to, let's say, 2 or 3 different potential spokespeople, where frankly, had we just said, hey, you know, here's a link to the PR Newswire or Business Wire press release, it's out, you know, let me know, I can help. Like, the story wouldn't be as good, or it would take longer to push out. So I think from our standpoint, like that, the success stories tend to be where the relationship works nicely. You're able to kind of provide background info, give them the opportunity to write the story in a timely manner, and it becomes somewhat of a win-win. And that the win is, you know, the journalist had ample time to write it. It goes out at an appropriate time. And from the comm standpoint, they've been able to get coverage in, you know, let a variety of different outlets, or even one. I think my horror stories are more, frankly, the journalist that says, oopsie, I thought you said 8:30. You know, the scenario you described, Dan, just from the perspective of us being like, hey, Dan, reporter, like, what happened? Like, we worked together a lot. You did this. And like, it's happened 2 or 3 times with the same person, to the point where I finally said, you're done. Like, we're not giving you news anymore.
But
And you
Kevin,
know, that's a hard line stance, but it happens.
do you actually have you actually like punished journalists for doing that? Because that's
100%.
yeah.
In the case of VentureBeat, I know it's a little bit outside of crypto. In the case of VentureBeat, I told my team, we're not working with VentureBeat. Like, we're done. We are absolutely done working with them. Sorry, VentureBeat.
But would you do that with a massive mainstream publication? You probably wouldn't, right?
Fair point. Fair point. Probably not. Would probably move to a different. It might be specific to that one journalist. You know, as well. You know, and if we knew that person or the editor involved, like in person, even just having like an honest conversation with the editor and being like, hey, here's what's going on, like, help us out here. And just to see kind of if there's a backstory behind it, maybe as well.
One thing I think we're agreeing on is, you know, certainly in theory, the idea of the embargo is benign and beneficial and meant to be helpful to the reporter, especially in crypto when we're talking about complicated tech. We're trying to give you, the reporter, both the time to talk to some people and also to write the story correctly. You know, Kevin, you talk about from your perspective what a success is. You didn't say this specifically, but like describes the tech correctly. Because we all hate when you post a story and immediately you get corrections and you roll your eyes, but very often the corrections are fair and correct. It's like, well, no, this isn't quite how our layer 2 works, or this isn't quite how the NFT works. It's actually, you said it's on Solana and it's actually in ordinals, whatever it is. So the intentions by both sides are good. I don't think we're going to solve this thing on this one panel. However, it might be interesting to explore what it would look like to agree as an industry not to share news this way. One thing that's been floated is the comms person just chooses one reporter at one publication that they have the relationship with, and they think it's right in that person's beat and wheelhouse, and they do the exclusive. And if any other sites want to follow, they're going to follow on their own. The only other alternative I've thought of is the project or company that has news to announce simply posts it on their blog. And I think very often that's what Coinbase does. But very few companies in the space that we cover are as big and as, you know, wield as much influence and importance as Coinbase. Coinbase can just post about the launch of Base to their blog. Everyone's going to cover it, even if you weren't tipped already. But are there any other possible avenues we can think of for comms people representing crypto projects to get upcoming news and announcements to crypto media without saying, here's the news, you can't publish about it until this time and date.
What if just like sending the information without an embargo, and then, you know, whoever is the fastest to write it up just writes it up?
Yeah, that used to be, you know, the RNS statements. That's usually how it works. Also, I'm noticing, especially on LinkedIn and in the tech industry, the whole comms channels are being upended and subverted by, you know, like Mark Zuckerberg will just go direct to TikTok, or you see, I think the Blackstone president has been videoing himself doing a walk and talk about their earnings. Completely new. That's never happened before. I think the word is direct to stakeholders, DTS. This is completely new. And if you want to cover Blackstone's CEO talking, you can do that. There's a lot of, I think, on Twitter or X, there's a lot of, you know, direct to consumer type of comms that's happening right now, and you can kind of come up with ways to cover it, different angles. I don't know, just a thought. I'm interested to hear what you think of that, Kevin.
I think that's a great point. The whole kind of direct conversation, it seems to be really pervasive, and especially in like the tech VC side of things, you know, as well. You don't need comms, just post it, etc. To Dan's scenario of kind of companies just posting to their blog. And if that happens, great. I mean, I feel like it somewhat neuters the, you know, kind of the quality of work a comms professional can do when it comes to media relations. And frankly, if the direct thing ends up being a trend, I feel like it creates more vanilla stories across the board. And you guys are basically being then spoon-fed marketing jargon as opposed to actual stories. Because I think that's how, you know, that's what these brands want to do. That's why they go to a corporate blog, for example, to Dan's point. They have their Marcom strategy. It involves, hey, we're going to put a blog announcement. And then in many cases, they want nothing to do with interacting with media, because the message stays as it is. It's on their corporate blog. It's on their website. The CEO recorded a video. That's it. And then you guys are forced to cover it as well. So I'm not a fan of that, but I completely acknowledge, Trista, that is a growing trend as well. And, you know, you're seeing comms teams shrink in many cases as well, or be folded into marketing as a whole as well. And so that is a challenge. And I think the art of storytelling somewhat gets lost when you have that. It's happening even in like the sports world too. I mean, a little bit off topic, but even in a hilarious vein, you know, athletes are being interviewed, and one of them declined to comment after a game because the reporter didn't listen to his podcast. Like, do we want a world where like you have crypto execs, any executive saying, well, you didn't listen to my live stream, that's all I'm going to say, like, I'm not interested. So I feel like there's an element that could really water down potential reporting opportunities as well.
Well, Kevin, just like to push back a little bit, I wish that the PRs that we get were interesting story ideas with different angles, but many times they are just like marketing fluff.
You're right.
So I mean, that's just something that I wish PR firms were better at. Like, I really do wish that PR firms treated announcements and embargoes the way that you've been talking about them, but that's most of the time that's not the case.
I completely agree with you. And I think maybe this is unique to crypto as well, in that, you know, I think there's probably a small number of firms and professionals that know what they're doing in this space as a whole. And it's tough to decipher sort of who's who. And I completely commiserate, Camila, on your end in terms of kind of getting pummeled. And then you add we're being pitched all of these tools AI tools, et cetera, from a lot of these media companies saying, hey, you can send a pitch via this new AI tool to 500 people. And it's like, well, why would we want to do that? But there's a market for that. And so like I get pitched every service known to man relative to that. And that just speaks to, I think, there's a growing sort of ecosystem of, let's just send it out with an AI tool and hope for the best. And the only way I see it is for reporters really to know, like, hey, here are kind of the good firms or the people that we want to work with, and just ignore the rest. But that is a challenge. Agreed.
There's we're coming up on under 10 minutes here, and there's a tweet that made the rounds. I almost hesitate to bring this up because it throws a flaming hot wrench into our panel here. But this is what we're all circling, is the question of going direct. It's funny that you mentioned athletes, Kevin. I had just written the same thing in the chat. The pro athletes now just announce on social, and then if you want to cover, you scramble, you don't get tipped. June, who's also one of the acjr co-founders, asked, when does going direct backfire? So that's another good lead in here. The tweet was from Balaji Srinivasan, who I think everyone on the call probably knows, Balaji or Balaji, creator of Earn, and then sold it to Coinbase. And so he was at Coinbase for a while, a creator of 21. It was originally called 21.co. Anyway, firebrand on social, his book is called The Network State. This is an April 4 tweet. Wow, 660,000 views. Do not hire PR. They want to train you to talk to journos, but journos hate you. So this is an obsolete model. Instead, just hire influencers, build your own channel, and go direct. Obviously, like most declarations I think he posts, there's some truth in here, but I think a lot that is wrong. I'd love to get all three of you to give your take on this.
A journalist hate you. I think that's a funny one. That's not true.
Don't you hate everyone in Silicon Valley, and your goal is to only write negative stories about them?
Actually, I mean, in crypto, we're more incentivized to write positive stories. We just are. So right there, that's but yeah, anything that's interesting. I don't really care if it's good or bad.
I think, I don't know, Balaji has this thing against journalism and media. I think it's very, and we see this type of narrative from tech bros in general, or like just Silicon Valley circles, that that they don't need the media, and they can they can go direct, or there's citizen journalism that will replace the New York Times and so on. Like there's just this narrative that has been growing over time. And I think it's just lack of understanding of how journalism actually works and the value that we provide. And that, it does take a lot of work, a professional training to actually report on news the way we do. I think citizen journalism or just influencers, all of that are good resources that obviously provide a lot of value, but they are a complement to news stories that require, research, talking to multiple parties, getting all sides of the story, fact checking, all of those things that, paid professionals do, and that, somebody just posting on Twitter won't, because they're just not paid to do all the work. They're just, they're paid to provide their own opinion. Same thing with going direct. Yeah, like you'll get the side of the CEO that's talking, but you won't, the reader, the audience will be extremely hurt. Like democracy will be hurt if this is the way that people get their information. Just like one-sided, not fact-checked, inaccurate, probably information, opinion, not facts. Like all of this is what happens if you completely undermine journalism and reporting. So I think it's just like total lack of understanding and total lack of appreciation of what journalism is.
There's so much on Twitter that's just not true. It's amazing how many times we've pulled on threads
Yeah,
from
imagine
rumors,
just like
from
thinking that that's the way people should receive all information, and that like media has no role in this. It's nuts. Like I don't know. It baffles me that that's still a thing that Balaji and other tech bros think.
For another panel.
Yeah.
ACJR panel, media trust.
Hmm.
For sure, for sure. I mean, I would definitely agree. It's a massive lack of understanding or care, and I'd be curious how many PR firms that he's ripped through over the years as well. In turn, to kind of get to that point. I mean, there's an element of headline grabbing to when folks post to X or Twitter as well, just to get clicks or views and just saying dumb things. And I would co-sign on that as just a really dumb perspective. Sorry for kind of the
Oh, 100%.
the frankness
dumb.
to it. I mean, and there's also a massive confusion around what PR is, and 100% aligning it with just media relations as well. And I think if you factor in the strategic side of communications in terms of brand building, yeah, there's definitely a role for influencers. But what happens when there's a crisis, when you have a breach, when someone on your management team gets caught with their hands in the cookie jar, you name whatever it can be, and you're going to go direct? How are you going to go direct if you're losing shareholder value or your tech breaks down? Who's communicating it? Your employees, your vendors, your customers. I mean, like, it's such an asinine statement that it's even hard to, but it is becoming more pervasive on the tech scene. And I don't even think it's a tech bro thing. I think it's a VC fueled technology and then leaking into crypto. And I can say that, we hear VC firms tell portfolio companies, many of who we work with, hey, you can only spend X on PR. And it's just an arbitrary number. It's not even based on anything. It's just some bean counter is saying, don't spend money on this because we need our value. And then it trickles down, and you have mouthpieces that kind of in a similar vein say that. So good luck. It will backfire, and it'll backfire in a crisis situation. And there will be, with everything being digital these days, there will be, whether it's a breach, a hack, you name it, there will be some sort of issue.
Suffice to say, we can all agree that there is a need in the space for media relations and PR, call it whatever you want, distribute out the task however you want. But right now there's an obvious gap and need for this. And that's why I think, I don't know about you guys, but anecdotally, I've seen more thinkfluencing and, posting on Twitter and LinkedIn about how to do PR, comms, and media from people who don't actually work in those fields than ever. In the past 3 months, suddenly everyone is an expert on PR and how to get PR easily and more cheaply without PR. But really appreciate the insights. Like I said, we weren't going to solve today how to improve embargoes, but I think there's a lot of food for thought on maybe alternative routes or how both sides can approach them more intelligently. So I know this video is going to go online, and I hope other people who didn't attend live watch it. Trista, Cami, and Kevin, thank you guys so much. And for anyone who joined late, I always forget if you can see the whole Zoom chat history. But if you, Molly, want to repost right now the link to the Telegram, anyone who's watching and is not in the ACJR room, you should get in there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
This is great.
Thanks again. It was fun.